So, do billionaires owe anything to the world? Why are people so entitled on billionaire wealth? I think is the question. I think to answer this with any sense of clarity, you have to frame the current social climate. All right, so let's start with some framing. Let's start with some historical context and precepts. All civilizations go through rises and periods of prosperity and falls. So you have your spring, your summer, your autumn, and your winter. And this is common across all societies and civilizations. This is not unique to any one in particular. So when your society is in a general civilizational rise, economy is growing, wages are up, people are making money, you don't typically care about wealth inequality too much because everybody has enough money. It's not something that's being focused on. When your society is going through an economic recession or a depression or it's on the decline, suddenly it becomes much more relevant who has more than other people. Currently in the United States, wealth inequality is at an extreme high. It's the highest it's been in some decades. And during the mid-20th century, wealth inequality in the United States actually managed to, it's never perfectly equal because equality doesn't exist in the real world, but it was not as disparate as it was now. I think the last time that there was relative parity was the 1970s. So wealth inequality has been increasing for the last 5 decades in the United States. So you have wealth inequality happening where a very small percentage of people are making extreme amounts of money, and then at the same time, even the upper middle class to lower class, they're making less. And you also have inflation happening where the buying power of the dollar has gone down. So to maintain the same standard of living, you have to make more money than ever before, which is already a struggle to do so. And real wages have not been rising in pace with inflation, in pace with the cost of living. So you get a situation like today in the United States. And I'm speaking solely to the US. I'm not going to comment on every other country because that requires its own fundamental analysis. But you have a situation right now in the United States where you have people who are ultra mega billionaires, and then you have a bunch of people, obviously, who are not. Now you perhaps have the question as to why is this happening? Since the 1970s in the United States, the predominant economic model for companies making money has been that of shareholder theory. And this was popularized by Milton Friedman. And the basic premise of shareholder theory is that a company is beholden to nobody but its shareholders. That's who it cares about, it needs to make the money, and that's it. A company does not owe anything to society, and Friedman made something of what you could call an attempt at a moral argument in regards to this, that by making the shareholders money, that was a net good, and as I said, a company is not beholden to society at large, and that's how companies should operate. And you can imagine for sort of corporate world, this was almost a revolution, so to speak, because this meant that they could make as much money as they want to, they could maximize profits and do what was necessary to maximize profits, and they were not going to be scrutinized the same way. And over the course of the last 50 years, it was made both practical policy and made into the standard operating norms. This is how companies function. This is how people think of companies. We don't think of companies today really owing society anything, which is not a mental conceptualization we have. We don't expect companies to improve the standard of living in the cities that they're really based in so much, or the states. That's almost something that's like a laughable idea now. So we don't expect companies to contribute to the social good. They are just expected to make as much money as possible. At the same time that's happening, because these are sort of parallel things happening, it's not any one thing, you also have the rise of an aristocratic educated class who are predominantly located in major liberal cities, Los Angeles, New York, East Coast, West Coast, and they operate within their own status bubbles and generally have contempt for anyone who is not part of their class. And this is what you call the betrayal of the elites. This has been written about for a very long time, where you have a group of Americans who look down upon other Americans. It's because of class, it's because of income levels, because of education. And again, their priorities for how they think the world works and should work are very different from people who are working class people. All right, we're outside now. So to keep going though, so you have this hyper wealthy class, then you have this educated elite class, and the educated elite class, they're not necessarily part of the hyper wealthy class, though they wish they were. Everybody always wants a status climb. And then you have the working class people, you have the middle class. And then on top of this, as I said, you got wealth inequality. And then to compound all of that, you have the rise of what you could simply call cultural Marxism, which has been circulating in the United States since the 1950s. And it's become vastly more relevant because inequality, as I said, has peaked since then. It's increased. So now it's something that is inserted into the conversation, and it actually at times can make some good points. Is it reasonable that certain people can have hundreds of billions of dollars and companies can be worth trillions and not contribute so much necessarily to society at large? Those are not unreasonable conversations. That said, that's a nuanced conversation. For most people who are middle class or working class, their concept of money is that money is evil. If someone has a lot of money, they must have done something bad to get not that amount of money. Talking about making money is almost shameful. It's something that you really don't do. So that kind of Marxist or socialist rhetoric, whatever you want to call it, it can be very appealing because it already sort of lines up with their own inherent attitudes. And then if you take that and then you compound it again by mainstream media culture, which is very much interested in conflict, and conflict is a business, and you account for the fact that the intellectual class, they don't necessarily contribute too much to society, but they'd like to status climb, and it's in their interest to pretend to be aligned with the common man and keep up that appearance. Well, now you can start having these rhetorical wars about how billionaires are evil and they shouldn't exist. You can start encouraging entitlement in younger generations, and young people don't know any better because they don't know anything about anything. So they'll lap up whatever you tell them to believe. And you create this class conflict environment, and that becomes part of the operating norm of the day, or the operating narrative. So hopefully that somewhat makes sense now that I added it all up. It's about like 5 or 6 different things. It's polycausal. It's not any one factor that contributes to that happening, but perhaps I gave you some perspective on it. If you got more questions, let me know.